I didn't mean to find the letters. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. If I had gone straight home that evening, if I hadn't opened that old wooden chest, if curiosity hadn't whispered, just look, my life would still make sense. But instead, I found a truth that had been waiting for me for 20 years. And someone who knew me long before I understood myself, had tried to warn me. It was raining the kind of rain that soaks into your bones, the kind that makes the world feel quieter, heavier. I remember standing in my childhood home, barefoot on cold hardwood floors, listening to the sound of water tapping against the windows like a countdown. I hadn't been back in that house in almost a decade. After my mother passed, I avoided it. Not because I didn't love her, but because loving her came with too many unanswered questions. That night, I was just there to collect a few things. Old photos, documents, maybe something to donate. Nothing emotional. At least, that's what I told myself. The power was out. Only a single lamp lit the living room, casting long shadows across the walls. Shadows that made the house feel unfamiliar, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I opened drawers I hadn't touched since I was a teenager. I flipped through photo albums filled with smiles that felt staged now. Then I saw it. The chest. Small, wooden, scratched at the corners. I remembered it instantly. My mother used to keep it under her bed. She always told me it was full of old junk, and I always believed her. The lock was already broken. That should have been my first warning. Inside were stacks of papers tied with fading ribbon. Some envelopes were yellowed with age. Others looked untouched, as if they had been waiting. My name was written on every single one. Not printed, not typed. Handwritten. Over and over again. Addressed to me. My heart started pounding so loud I thought I might pass out. Because these weren't birthday cards. They weren't notes of encouragement. They were letters. Long ones. And every single envelope had a date stamped nearly 20 years ago. I was a child then, too young to understand what someone was trying to tell me. The first letter shook in my hands as I opened it. I didn't read it right away. I couldn't. Because at the top, before the message even started, there were 4 words written darker than the rest, as if the writer had pressed the pen harder. If you ever find this. That's when I realized something terrifying. These letters were never meant to be found then. They were meant to be found now. I sat down on the floor, back against the couch, rain still echoing outside. And before I read a single word, one thought ran through my mind. What kind of truth gets hidden from a child for 20 years? And why did everyone in my life pretend it never existed? I didn't know it yet, but opening those letters would unravel everything I thought I knew about my mother, my family, and the man I was told was my father. Someone had tried to tell me the truth long ago, and someone else made sure I never heard it. Before the letters, before the questions, before everything cracked open, I need you to understand who I was, because the truth doesn't hit the same unless you know the life it interrupted. My name is Nia Walker. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, in a brick house that always smelled like fried onions, lavender cleaner, and whatever my mother was cooking to stretch the week's groceries. It wasn't a perfect home, but it was stable. And for a Black girl growing up in a world that doesn't promise you much, that stability meant everything. My mother, Evelyn Walker, was the kind of woman people leaned on. Church ladies loved her, neighbors trusted her with their kids, strangers told her their business without knowing why. She worked 2 jobs most of my childhood, one at the hospital cafeteria during the day, another cleaning offices downtown at night. She didn't complain. She just moved. Always tired, always composed, always carrying something she never put down. She raised me alone. At least, that's what I was told. When I asked about my father, she always gave the same answer. He wasn't ready. 3 words. No anger, no bitterness, just a closed door. And I learned early not to knock on it. Growing up, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt protected. My mother made sure I never lacked love, even if money was tight and time was thinner. She came to every school play, every parent-teacher meeting, every basketball game where I barely touched the ball. She sat in the front row, clapping like I was already somebody. And when people asked me who my father was, I said, "It's just me and my mom," with pride. But there were things that never added up. Little things, the kind you don't question as a child, but revisit later when memory sharpens. Like how my mother froze whenever a certain name came up on the news, or how she changed the subject anytime someone mentioned the neighborhood we used to live in before I turned 6, or how she refused to attend one specific church across town. She always said it didn't feel right. And then there was Mr. Harris. He lived 3 houses down. Quiet man, always polite, always distant. He'd wave when I rode my bike past his yard. Sometimes he'd ask how school was going. Nothing unusual. Except my mother never waved back. She never spoke his name, and whenever I stopped to talk too long, she'd call me inside like something bad was about to happen. At the time, I thought she was just being protective. Now, I know she was being afraid. As I got older, I became the kind of woman who planned everything: college, career, marriage, eventually. I worked in human resources, helping other people organize their lives while quietly ignoring the parts of my own that didn't make sense. I told myself, the past doesn't matter if the present works. And for the most part, it did, until my mother got sick. Cancer doesn't announce itself politely. It shows up and starts rearranging everything. During her last year, I moved back home to care for her. We talked about everything except the past. She told me stories about her childhood, her regrets, her dreams she never chased. But when I asked her, gently, about my father, her voice would change. Not angry, just distant. "Some things are better left where they are," she'd say. The last conversation we ever had still echoes in my head. She was weak, barely awake. She squeezed my hand and said, "No matter what you learn one day, I loved you the best way I knew how." At the time, I thought she was talking about death. I didn't realize she was talking about truth. When she passed, I packed my life into boxes and left that house behind. I didn't think there was anything left there for me. I was wrong. Because those letters, they weren't just messages from the past. They were proof that my entire life was built on a choice someone else made for me. And whoever wrote them knew my mother would never hand them over herself. I finally opened the first letter at 9:47 p.m. I know the time because I checked my phone, hoping, irrationally, that the date might somehow make this feel less real. It didn't. The handwriting was neat, but tired, like someone who had learned to be careful with their words. I recognized it instantly, not because I'd seen it before, but because I'd felt it. Some people write the way they speak, others write the way they're afraid to. This was the second kind. Nia, if you're reading this, then I failed to tell you the truth when it mattered most. I hope you're grown now. I hope you're safe, and I hope you've had a life full of love, even if it wasn't the one I wanted to give you. My chest tightened. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone who knew me. I've written this letter 100 times in my head. Every version starts the same. I am your father. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I stopped breathing for a moment, like my body didn't know what to do with that sentence. My father? No, that couldn't be right. I read it again, slower. I don't know what your mother has told you. I don't know what she plans to tell you. I only know that she believes silence is protection. I swallowed hard. That sounded exactly like her. The letter went on, but I couldn't keep reading. My hands were shaking too badly. Because suddenly, 20 years of questions were lining up in my mind like dominoes, and the first one had just been tipped. I stood up and paced the living room. Every memory replayed differently now. Every conversation felt altered. Every silence louder. I forced myself back down and kept reading. When you were born, I wanted to be there. I begged to be there. But love doesn't always win when fear is stronger. Fear, not abandonment. Fear. He wrote about the night I was born, about standing in the hallway of the hospital because he wasn't allowed in the room, about hearing me cry for the first time and being told he couldn't touch me. He said my mother looked at him like she was already saying goodbye. She said, "You'll only complicate her life." I felt anger rise in my chest. Not sharp, not explosive, just deep and heavy. The letter ended with something that stopped me cold. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope that one day you'll know that I never stopped watching from a distance. Watching? From where? That's when I heard something outside. A car door. Slow, careful. I froze. I stood up and peeked through the window. The streetlight flickered as a man stepped onto the sidewalk. Older, grayer, familiar. My stomach dropped. It was Mr. Harris, the quiet neighbor, the one my mother never spoke to, the one who lived 3 houses down. He stood there for a moment, just looking at the house, like he was deciding whether or not to leave, like he'd done it before. My heart started racing, because suddenly the letters weren't just history, they were alive, and whoever wrote them might still be close enough to see the lights on. I didn't open the door. I didn't call out. I just stood there, letter in hand, realizing that the truth hadn't been buried. It had been waiting. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I sat on the edge of the couch with the letter folded in my lap, staring at the front door like it might open on its own and explain everything. It didn't. The house stayed quiet, but my mind didn't. By morning, I had read 6 more letters, each one heavier than the last, each one written years apart. Different ink, different paper, same truth. Mr. Harris, David Harris, had written to me every year on my birthday until I turned 18. Then the letters stopped. Not because he stopped caring, but because, as he wrote in the last one, "You're an adult now, and adults deserve the choice to come looking or not." That sentence broke something in me, because choice was exactly what I'd never been given. By noon, anger had replaced shock, not the kind that makes you scream, the kind that makes your chest ache and your jaw tighten, the kind Black women learn to carry quietly. I drove to my Aunt Lorraine's house. If anyone knew something, it would be her. She and my mother were only a year apart, thick as thieves until the end. When I asked her if she remembered David Harris, her hands froze mid-chop over a cutting board. That was answer enough. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She just sighed, long, tired, and said, "Your mama thought she was saving you." Saving me from what? From a man who wrote letters for 20 years he never sent? From a father who lived 3 houses down and never crossed a line? Or from her own fear of losing control? Aunt Lorraine told me the version she knew, that my mother had been young, that David wanted to be involved, that they fought, quietly, painfully, and that one day my mother decided alone. She said, "You didn't want you confused," my aunt whispered. She said the world already treats Black girls like they belong to everybody. She wanted you to belong to yourself. I wanted to understand. I really did. But understanding doesn't erase harm. That evening, I sat in my car across the street from David Harris's house. Lights on, curtains open, a man inside, moving slowly, carefully, like someone used to being alone. I watched him make tea, water plants, sit down at the table. And for the first time in my life, I wondered how many times he'd watched me the same way. Not like a stranger, like a father who wasn't allowed to knock. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I saw your light on last night. I think you found the letters." My heart stopped. "I won't come to you unless you ask, but I'm here." I stared at the screen for a long time, because replying meant crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, and not replying meant staying in a story that wasn't mine. I typed, deleted, typed again, then finally sent, "Why didn't you fight harder?" The response came almost immediately, because fighting her would have meant hurting you. That answer didn't satisfy me, but it cracked something open. I went back into the house and pulled out the last letter, the one dated the year my mother died. I hadn't read it yet. I wasn't ready, but I was running out of places to hide. I waited until midnight to open the last letter, not because I wanted the drama, but because some truths feel like they belong to the quiet. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows fogged, like the world was holding its breath with me. The envelope was thicker than the others, heavier, like it carried more than just words. The date on the front made my throat tighten. It was written 3 weeks before my mother died, which meant she knew. She knew he was still writing, and she still never told me. The letter began differently. The handwriting wasn't as steady. There were pauses where the pen had clearly stopped, as if the writer wasn't sure he should go on. "Nia, if this is the last letter I write, it's because your mother asked me to stop." My stomach dropped. Not because she hated me, not because she wanted to punish me, but because she was afraid the truth would destroy the life you built. Destroy it how? I kept reading, slowly, carefully. He wrote about the year I was conceived, about being involved in community organizing, about marching, speaking, standing up, and about one night, coming home to find his apartment trashed, police reports, threats, broken windows. We weren't important enough to make the news, but we were important enough to scare. Then came the line that made my hands go cold. Your mother was pregnant when they warned me to disappear. Disappear, not leave, disappear. He explained that my mother had been approached, quietly, that she was told associating with him could put her child in danger, that someone made it very clear, a black man who didn't know when to stay quiet could lose more than his freedom. My chest felt tight. This wasn't about love gone wrong. This was about survival. Your mother chose you, he wrote. She chose safety over truth. I stopped reading, because suddenly my anger didn't know where to go. The letter went on, explaining how my mother insisted he stay close but unseen, close enough to help if something happened, far enough to never be blamed. She asked me to promise that if you ever came looking, I would tell you everything, not my version, not hers, the truth. Tears blurred the words, because for the first time, my mother's silence made sense, not as cruelty, not as control, but as a shield. The last paragraph was barely legible. She doesn't want you to hate her when you find out. She wants you to know she loved you so much she carried this alone. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not for what I lost, but for what she carried. My phone buzzed again, another message from David. "I'm sorry I waited so long. I didn't know how to tell you without breaking you." I finally replied, "She didn't break me. She protected me, but I wish she'd trusted me sooner." The response took longer this time. Me too. For the first time, the truth didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like a responsibility. We met on a Sunday morning, not at his house, not at mine, neutral ground, a small cafe near the park, quiet, worn, and familiar in the way old places are, the kind of place where nobody rushes you out the door. I arrived early, ordered coffee I didn't drink, watched the door every time it opened. When he walked in, I recognized him instantly, not because I'd studied his face, but because something in me already knew it. He looked older up close, more fragile than I expected, but when our eyes met, something settled. Not relief, recognition. He didn't hug me, didn't reach out, just stood there and said softly, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. That was all I could manage. We sat. Silence stretched between us, not awkward, just heavy. Finally, I asked the question that had been living in my chest for decades. "Did you ever resent her?" He didn't hesitate. No. Not a long explanation, not a defense, just the truth. He told me stories, not excuses, about watching me graduate from across the street, about seeing me leave for college, about sitting in his car when my mother's lights stayed on late, knowing she was sick before anyone told. He was there, just never visible. I told him about my life, my job, my disappointments, the relationships that never quite worked. I didn't call him dad, not yet, maybe not ever, but I didn't call him a stranger either. At one point, he slid something across the table, a photo. My mother, younger, laughing, her hand on his arm. She looked free. She was brave, he said, braver than either of us wanted to admit. I nodded, because now I knew the cost of that bravery. When we stood to leave, he asked one last thing. What do you need from me? That question mattered because it gave me control of the story for the first time. I thought for a moment, then said, honesty and patience. He smiled. Not wide, not emotional, just grateful. We didn't promise forever. We didn't rewrite the past. We just agreed to move forward carefully, together. I went back to the house one last time before selling it, not to search for anything, just to say goodbye. I stood in my childhood bedroom, the walls still faintly marked where posters once hung. I realized something then. The truth doesn't erase the love you already received, it just explains the shape it took. My mother wasn't perfect, but she was intentional. She made a choice in a world that rarely gives Black women safe ones, and she carried the weight so I wouldn't have to. David and I talk now, not every day, not like a movie ending, but honestly, carefully, on our terms. Sometimes he tells me stories about my mother I never knew. Sometimes we sit in silence. Both count. I keep the letters in a box of my own now, not hidden, not locked away, just stored, like truth should be, handled with care. If you're watching this and wondering whether the past can change your present, it can, but only if you let it teach instead of punish you. Someone tried to tell me the truth long ago. It waited, patiently, until I was ready to hear it.